what is your reporting saying on what is going on Capitol Hill with the funding of Ukraine and Zelensky's visit? And I'll bring up your article in just a second here.
Yeah, well, it looks like Zelensky's going to be leaving empty-handed because the Republicans are standing pretty firm on these border issues that they want the Democrats to make concessions on. I was really surprised to see. I saw Lindsey Graham today say they're not passing anything until the Democrats cave on the border. So, I mean, he's been one of the biggest cheerleaders for this proxy war the whole time, and said some of the most, insane rhetoric has come from him, calling for Putin to be assassinated. I think, there's probably a lot of things that explain this. One thing, obviously, is that these Republicans now, even the more hawkish ones, supporting Israel's slaughter in Gaza seems to be their priority now. And when it comes to the war in Ukraine, Ukraine is in trouble right now because, by my estimate, the U.S. still has between 4 and 5 billion to send weapons to Ukraine. But the Zelensky government has been reliant on funding from the U.S. to fund the government. I mean, the U.S. has been propping up their government for the past almost 2 years, and that money's dried up. And Zelensky's in trouble because it's pretty clear now that, once this war's over and they actually have a presidential election, if he allows them to have one, that he's in trouble. So that's why, we saw this story from me here. The headline is that he was pleading for more military aid because that's what he was doing. I mean, there's nothing dignified about what Zelensky has done on Capitol Hill on Monday and Tuesday. He's begging now, and it doesn't seem like he's getting what he wanted. Now, at the same time, you got Biden still and other Democrats and committed to funding this war for another year. And Mike Johnson, the new House Speaker, he's saying once we get a border deal, we'll pass the aid. They're not saying they're not going to pass it. So there's still the chance that they continue funding this thing for another year. But still, it's just not looking good for Zelensky.
Yeah, it sounds like, because I'm following the story too, it sounds like what's holding up the funding, I guess you can look at it this way, is the Democrats refusing to come on board with any border sort of policy changes. Because if they did, like you said, the Republicans, they're not against funding necessarily as much as in principle as we would think, or I should say not all of them, some of them are. But what strikes me is that, well, actually, let me ask you the question before I give you my opinion. Do you think if the Israel conflict never sort of popped off or never sort of upticked the way that it has after October 7th, do you think there would be this sort of ship jumping off the Ukraine ship of support from all these Congress members?
I don't think so. I mean, it's hard to say, but again, like, there was this real issue before, the October 7th, when everything really, popped off here, of the U.S. running out of ammunition, of NATO running out of, artillery shells that they're sending to Ukraine. And that sounded like it was a real issue for the U.S. military. So now they have this war in Gaza that they want to support. And Israel wants some of those same, the big cherished round now is the 155 millimeter artillery rounds. And the U.S. has sent over 2 million to Ukraine, and they're, at a rate that they can't produce nearly that many to keep sustaining this war in Ukraine. So I think that's a big thing, that this is the priority. Like, when it comes down to it, especially for Republicans, supporting Israel, no matter what they're doing, no matter how many civilians they kill, that's the priority over Ukraine. And if they could keep Ukraine kind of at this stalemate that it's at now, I think that's fine with them. It's clear Ukraine can't beat Russia on the battlefield. Over time, Russia is probably going to be able to start gaining more territory. But for now, I think just keeping the conflict going, I think they're fine with, because they see, they know that if they ship more weapons over there, it's not going to really change anything on the battlefield.
Yeah, and that leads me to this segment in the article that briefly brings up the counteroffensive, and as far as it referring to describing what it is or the results, and that is, despite Ukraine's failed offensive, Zelensky is determined to continue the war, even as Ukraine top general has said Ukraine forces have little chances of breaking through Russian defenses, and Ukraine is facing a manpower shortage. there's a couple of things I want to address here, but let's go to that thing that to me that's kind of stands out, and that is a manpower shortage. Now, you tell me if this figure is right. I've heard this. I can't remember. I think I heard it in. Yeah, it was a State of the Union. I forget the name of the Republican that was interviewed, but he was saying the average age of the people in the Ukraine war is something like 43. Is that accurate? And can you speak to that into this part when you say there's a shortage of manpower? What are you referring to?
Yeah, that sounds right. I've seen that elsewhere that the average age is 43. And one thing I actually read in Bloomberg today, one of the things Zelensky told Republicans when he was making the pitch for more aid that they were thinking about conscripting men over the age of 40 now, expanding the draft so they could draft people that are over the age of 40 to solve this manpower shortage. And, with this war, it's been very strange that we don't know how many Ukrainians have been killed. It's a really weird propaganda tactic because I guess they don't want to know how many, the real human cost of this war. I know estimates in the hunt that hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians have been killed. And, I would say 300, 400,000 is not out of the realm of possibility. I mean, that's a huge number of people. And, so when it comes to actual numbers, like how many people they're short of, what it actually means, it's tough to say. But I know this one thing I mentioned here in this article was this Time Magazine report, which was not very good for Zelensky. It quoted people close to him saying he's delusional, basically thinking that Ukraine can win the war. But one Ukrainian official said, even if the West gives us all the weapons that we want, everything we ask for, the F-16s, whatever they can get their hands on, that they don't have the men to use them. So apparently the manpower shortage is a pretty big deal, and they're cracking down on people trying to leave the country, trying to dodge the draft. And so it's just a really bad situation for the people in Ukraine that don't want to go fight this war. They're really cracking down and trying to draft as many people as they can now.
So it seems like the funding, it's like he's coming over not for funding about the war. I wonder if he's moved to sort of come here and beg because the people who were getting their pensions paid, the people who were getting their salaries paid are the ones who are really putting pressure like, hey, we need to feed our families, because that would be a type of pressure that I wouldn't see that would go away anytime soon. But I do want to bring up this very short video, and it's of Chuck Schumer, because to your point about Zelensky still trying to convince people or Congress that somehow he could win this war, Ukraine could win this war. Chuck Schumer actually speaks about this, and I'll play it. It's less than 90 seconds, and then we'll comment on the other side here.
It was a very powerful meeting. President Zelensky made it so clear how he needs help, but if he gets the help, he can win this war. And he outlined in some great detail, the kind of help he needs and how it will help him win. Even many.
Now I'm gonna pause it here because it's one of those questions I just want to ask and put it out there, because of course I know the answer. Now, do you think it's like Chuck Schumer, of the people who come out of this meeting, he seems the most excited, and he seems the one who has described what Zelensky says in such terms that I haven't heard anyone else describe with such excitement, that that he said he's going to win, and he has a detailed plan to win. It's kind of one of those questions where I already know the answer. Do you think Chuck Schumer believes that, or he's just saying whatever he needs to say to get this money here, based on your reporting, of course?
Yeah, I mean, I would say he's just saying, this is just all part of the pitch to get the money. I mean, the idea that Zelensky outlined some plan that if you give us X amount of weapons, it means we could win this war. I mean, there's just no way that's true. Or maybe he did outline some plan, but there's no way it's a real plan, path to Ukrainian victory. There was a report in New York Times yesterday that said the U.S. and Ukraine are like looking for a new strategy on the counteroffensive, and that the U.S. is encouraging Ukraine to just hold the territory that it has for as long as it can, basically. I mean, so that goes to show, there's no chance of a Ukrainian victory in the sense of what Zelensky has defined as victory, which is pushing Russia out of all the territory it controls. So what is, curious to know what Schumer really means by victory here.
Yeah, and I was just about to switch up the video, and then man, I was thinking of the same thing. Like, what does he say after this? Because that's the point that I wanted to bring up. But he does go on. If I do remember, he does go on to sort of do more of these cheerleading sort of things and make these over the top promises. But listen to what he says here.
Many of our Republican colleagues talked about we are winning this war. And if we get the help if he gets the help he needs, he will win. On the other hand, he made it clear, and we all made it clear, that if we lose, Putin wins. And this will be very, very dangerous for the United States. So we cannot let Putin influence through any surrogate what we need to do for Ukraine. He also made one other point. He needs the aid quickly. If we don't give the aid quickly, several things will happen. First, the military needs, but second, Europe and many other allies will say, "What is going on here? They're not giving them the aid."
I mean, he's one of the shameless.
Sorry, I lost my sound. I just gotta try. I think I gotta switch the headphones. I don't know if you could hear me. Sorry.
No, if you said anything, I couldn't hear you until just right now. No worries, no worries. But like I was saying, you get your audio all set up. What Chuck Schumer here now? This part here, I'm gonna play for you guys. Replay for you guys. Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me? Let me type in here. He may not be able to hear me. I can hear you. Oh, you know what? I can hear you. Try going out and coming back into the room. All right, so that should work. All right, so he's having a sound problem all of a sudden. Let me see. Try going out and then coming back in. All right, so I'm gonna put you in the back, Dave. I think he's switching his cables. Let me give him a chance to get back to the screen so I can tell him what's going on.
Fuck.
Oh. Yeah, he still can't hear anything. His levels are not even moving. All right, he can't hear me anyway. I'm gonna put him in the back and just continue the segment and bring him back in when his audio is back on. So let me go back to the point. It's 2 points I wanted to comment on. Let me see.
Fuck, man.
Okay, let me see. I can hear you. Try going out and coming back in if you can hear that. There he goes. That should fix it. Hopefully that should fix it. Usually fixes it. Especially when you make any sound changes on here. Let's play it again, and when he comes back and I get the thumbs up from him, I'm going to put him back in.
And this will be very, very dangerous for the United States. So we cannot let Putin influence through any surrogate.
That part is the first part I wanted to address. So he's saying he doesn't want Putin to interfere with any surrogate. That is his way of saying anyone who dissents from giving money right away to Ukraine is being influenced by his surrogate. This is how they so easily it rolls off to their tongue where they say you're a Putin puppet just because you have an opinion that's different from the State Department and the military industrial complex. Let's continue.
What we need to do for Ukraine. He also made one other point. He needs the aid quickly. If we don't give the aid quickly, several things will happen. First, the military needs, but second, Europe and many other allies will say, what is going on here?
Europe and many other allies will say, what is going on here?
They're not giving them the aid.
Like Chuck Schumer is one of those that is just despicable, but I do have another clip that I want to go to. And because what's funny about this story on Ukraine is now we haven't heard really any major news on Ukraine besides the funding. We haven't really heard any major sort of developments in the counteroffensive, any major sort of development in taking any sort of land. Haven't heard any of that. But today, on the day, or is this the day, on the day that he's meeting with people in DC, look at what drops out of the Ukraine news sky. U.S. declassifies intel on Russia's staggering losses as Zelensky pleads for cash. So magically, they declassify shit that shows the number of the death toll that on the Russian side only.
Political gridlock on Capitol Hill may be jeopardizing the fight against Russia in Ukraine. Right now, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is in Washington pleading for Congress to approve more military aid for his country. Next hour, he's scheduled to sit down one-on-one with President Biden. This morning, he met with senators and House members arguing that the political bickering over Ukraine aid is exactly what Vladimir Putin wants to see.
And yet, so far, Republicans seem unmoved. Some GOP senators even walked out of their meeting. Also today, we have newly declassified U.S. intelligence about Russia's strategy and why.
I'm going to check on Dave really quick to see if his sound is better, if he can hear me. What's up, Dave? Okay.
What's up?
I can hear
Sorry,
you.
my microphone just decided to stop working. Can you hear me? Do I sound all right?
Yeah. Is it the same mic is working now or no?
No, this is just the built-in one now.
Okay.
I don't know
it happens sometimes. I don't know how often you use StreamYard, but this actually happens pretty often, at least twice a week, where we have to tell somebody to go out. So I didn't know if it was your mic or if it was StreamYard.
Yeah, it was the mic. Sorry if you heard me cursing.
Actually, only part of it I did, but that's completely all right because we do that here. And you came back right at the right time. Because what I was saying is, you heard Chuck Schumer say that they could win this fight, and you spoke about how it's unusual that we can't, or we have not gotten the death toll count for the Ukrainian side. And I was saying how we hadn't really gotten any big news about the counteroffensive because they're trying to keep that on the hush and hush about them losing. We really hadn't gotten really major news until today, until the day that Zelensky comes to be in DC. Then this news drops here, and it says U.S. declassifies intel on Russia's staggering losses. So somehow, Dave, they don't know, they can't report the Ukrainian side losses, but they know Russia's side. And let's listen to what this segment says. It's about 5 minutes. I'll stop and start, but let's get to the actual number they say that Russia's on Russia's losses here.
Political gridlock on Capitol Hill may be jeopardizing the fight against Russia in Ukraine. Right now, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is in Washington pleading for Congress to approve more military aid for his country. Next hour, he's scheduled to sit down one-on-one with President Biden. This morning, he met with senators and House members arguing that the political bickering over Ukraine aid is exactly what Vladimir Putin wants to see.
And yet, so far, Republicans seem unmoved. Some GOP senators even walked out of their meeting. Also today, we have newly declassified U.S. intelligence about Russia's strategy and why the Kremlin is aiming for a winter stalemate. We have CNN chief congressional correspondent Manu Raju. He is on the Hill, along with CNN reporter.
You know, I do want to stop it here and speak about something I talked about in yesterday's stream, and that's where you're starting to see a lot more. And I think it is you're starting to see a lot more where they're there's making a seamless change to a different segment without you telling you they're like there's no indication they're making a change. So it's unusual. I do a lot of watching of this corporate media, so it's unusual because what I believe why they're doing is that they're it's to put a good and a bad together. Like if it's a narrative that's against what they want, they match it up right directly against the narrative that they do want. So that's why they add this here, and like I said, it's like a seamless change from speaking about Zelensky and the money to going to this declassified without really making a clear distinction. Now listen to what she says about this declassified intel.
Katie Bo-Lillis. Manu, let's start with you. I mean, as we await this White House meeting, what are you hearing on the Hill?
Yeah, nothing has changed. In fact, the stalemate persists, and there are real fears that there's aid to Ukraine. Even the supporters who back aid to Ukraine believe that this will drag into next year, despite the urgent pleas by the president of Ukraine, who is poised to leave Capitol Hill empty-handed. He met behind closed doors with Senate Republicans and Senate Democrats, trying to make his case about why aid is needed. I'm told that he told senators he expected that they would eventually come through, and he indicated that the money would be looked at. There'd be significant accountability in Ukraine for federal dollars. And he met with the Speaker of the House and the House Democratic leader. But the fact of the matter is that Republicans are still insisting that there needs to be a deal to deal with the southern border with Mexico, to tighten immigration restrictions. They said that must come first before they agreed to approving aid to Ukraine, even as there is no path for a deal on immigration, as the two sides remain badly divided. Something that even staunch supporters of Ukraine aid, like Senator Mitt Romney, indicated must be dealt with first, immigration, before there's a deal on Ukraine.
Reality is that the House is not going to take up a Ukraine bill unless it includes securing the border to the level that existed under the three prior presidents. When people elect a Republican majority in the House, you have to listen to what they have to say.
Are you concerned that if there's no money, Ukraine could lose the war to Russia?
Well, that's always been a big possibility the whole time. I mean, I've never thought they could win to begin with.
You hear that? What is your reaction? Because this is not the first time I've heard somebody sort of where that's not the topic, but you can hear them make comments like this, where it's like that's not anything I really thought would happen. I think it was Richard Haas on Morning Joe. What do you think when you hear a congressperson now say something like that and comparing it to what Congress has been uniformly saying about this, sort of October 7th? Like, what do you think of that dynamic and change in describing what's going on?
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty amazing to hear him just say that. I never thought they could win. Yeah, because we've been hearing for so long that, this is the most important thing that in the world. Mitch McConnell said a few times that the biggest priority for Republicans is supporting Ukraine so they could beat Putin, so he won't march into Europe. So yeah, it seems like all the talking points are just kind of fading away as they're moved on to another issue. And going back to that declassification of these Russian casualties, so now they're saying over 300,000 Russians have been killed after we haven't heard anything about Ukrainian casualties, and we haven't heard any estimates about Russian casualties in recent months, from the U.S. So all of a sudden, the day Zelensky's in Washington, they put that information out. I mean, it's just such a transparent attempt to get more money for this war. And that's how some people in Congress have been trying to sell it now. I know Mitt Romney has said this, that they say, the battle lines haven't changed much. The counteroffensive has failed, but they sure are killing a lot of Russians is basically what they're saying, where they say that we're inflicting all this damage on the Russian military and no Americans are dying, only Ukrainians are dying. That's actually how they're trying to sell this thing. So I think it's part of that narrative to say, look how much hurt we're putting on the Russians. Don't you want to keep funding this? Which to us sounds insane, but I guess to some of the politicians they need to convince, it might sound appealing to them.
Absolutely. Now, in the same segment, they're going to pivot slightly again and give a little more detail about the Intel report that you just referred to. So let's let they bring in another reporter who gives a little more detail of that report.
Leaving Washington without any aid, unclear when and if that may happen.
Manu, thank you so much for the update. We want to bring in Katie Bolilis now because, Katie, you have some new reporting on this declassified intelligence report that was provided to members of Congress, and it's really providing startling details about Russia's losses on the battlefield.
Yeah, some pretty staggering numbers here, Boris. This intelligence assessment provided to Congress yesterday reports, and I'm going to give you some of these figures, reports that of the 360,000 troops that Russia sent into Ukraine initially and that made up their entire standing ground force prior to the invasion, of those, 315,000 have been lost on the battlefield. That's an 87.
Let me ask you just a wide-ranging general question about the military-industrial complex. Has there ever been reports in past wars where there has been so-called leaked intelligence that says one thing and then it ends up not being true? Is there any basis in why I would think that, or any track record with the United States military forces?
Yeah, I mean, that's certainly a pattern in the history of the U.S. And the wars that it gets involved in. Of course, the one that the most notorious one today is the WMDs in Iraq. Yes. But there's been, this goes along kind of at a smaller level than just WMDs. And do you remember the Russian bounty story that Russia put bounties on the heads of American troops in Afghanistan? That was what I think. 2019, 2020, it was when Trump was trying to negotiate a deal to withdraw from Afghanistan. It was so obviously fake and just an effort to block that withdrawal. And then a few years later, maybe not even that long later, there was another report. That turns out that wasn't true. So yeah, I think, we have every right to be suspicious and not just believe the things that benefit their narrative so much. Again, just the timing of this to put this out now.
And that's what was startling to me, is that wow, on the day of, you somehow now know the number of casualties. That is really weird and odd, but let it finish and then we'll comment. And then I also want to bring in some talk about Israel, of course.
Reports that of the 360,000 troops that Russia sent into Ukraine initially and that made up their entire standing ground force prior to the invasion, of those, 315,000 have been lost on the battlefield. That's an 87% loss of Russia's standing ground forces before the invasion. Now, look, important to understand that Russia has been able to defray these losses. They have been able to lean on, for example, the Wagner Group with some of their convict fighters. They have also launched a number of conscriptions and mobilizations to try to sort of throw more bodies at this fight. So they have been able to defray some of these losses. Still, this assessment warning, and again, I'm going to quote from this directly, this assessment warning that the war has sharply set back 15 years of Russian effort to modernize its ground force. So huge and important figures. But again, I think very important to be reading this in the context of what Manu has just been telling us, of course, which is that the real peril for Ukraine here is that U.S. funding may run out. And so I think you're going to hear these sort of staggering numbers, these Russian losses really talked about as evidence that, look, the Ukrainians are capable of exacting costs against the Russian military if they are provided with the military support to get it done.
What I want to speak on, and that's the end of that segment. Segment on TV. What I want to speak on is that how it's just like, why is it in U.S. interest? Why is it in the average person's interest, Americans' interest, that Russia be weakened? What does that do for us? You know what I'm saying? Like, what? So you're saying the goal of this military, our military participation is we are getting a good deal. We're not having to lose any bodies for this amount of money, and we're weakening Russia. And that's then the question has to be, weakening Russia for what? Do you have a answer or sort of a theory on what exactly, to the layperson. Now, I know militarily what they would say, but to a layperson, what exactly, how is this beneficial to the average American? And I'll just leave it there. I'll leave it more open ended.
Yeah, I mean, I would say it's pretty clear that it's not beneficial to us. Another talking point that you're hearing from Biden now is if we don't give this money to Ukraine and Russia wins in Ukraine, then they're going to roll into Eastern Europe, and that's NATO territory. That means direct war between the U.S. and Russia. That means we have to send your U.S. troops, your sons and daughters over there to fight Russia. So that's just a complete nonsensical talking point. I think it's John Mearsheimer who always points out that before 2014, before the coup in Kiev and Russia taking Crimea and the start of the Donbass war, nobody in U.S. media ever claimed that Putin was trying to, roll into Eastern Europe, was trying to restore the Russian Empire, which became such a common talking point in the past, few years now. But that's how they have to sell it, that Russia is this big bad threat that, if we don't stop them here, then they're just going to keep going and going and going, then cross the Atlantic Ocean. But there's just no truth to that. And this actually makes war between the U.S. and Russia much more likely. I mean, the U.S. is supporting. There was this report in the Washington Post recently that didn't get much attention because all the Israel-Gaza stuff was happening, that basically detailed how the CIA helped build up Ukraine's intelligence agencies since 2014, funding them to tens of millions of dollars, and they're carrying out assassinations inside Russia. I mean, it's incredible that we haven't sparked a direct war with Russia already. So just the fact that that's their argument, that if we don't do this, we might have to fight a war with Russia, it's just such, it's so transparently just not a real argument.
It speaks to the power of the lobby, and I've been saying this, like a lot of lobbies' power has been on display in the different industries. You see the Israeli lobby, you see the weapons manufacturers lobby, really in both lobbying, both for Israel and Ukraine, but they're still trying to squeeze as much as they can out of this so-called war, proxy war, that everybody understands that they're never going to win, that they're never going to, take back these territories, Crimea. These are fantasies that they speak of.